Life is a journey. Tennis star Naomi Osaka wrote in a powerful op-ed from the cover of Time magazine this week. Now, I'm not sure how the ladies' final this morning is going, but Naomi Osaka is not playing in it because she's not playing at Wimbledon. That message about life's journey is a central theme of our Parsha. A midrash suggests the reason we list this week each of the stations along our ancestral journey through the wilderness is because the sages compare this to a king whose child is taken ill. So the father takes the child to a specialist. The Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, record the journeys that Israel undertook in the wilderness in order that they should know what kind of miracles I performed for them. How will they know? From all that they read regarding Eila Maaseh, these are the journeys. On the way back, the father reminisces, here's where you had a headache, and here's where we stopped to rest, and so on and so forth. Now, on one hand, this famous midrash, like the Parsha, captures our national nostalgia. Look at what care we received on our journey from God, the ultimate parent figure. But on the other hand, this is a story of woe, of illness. The journey was hard. Most of it was unaccounted for. The stories we do have are largely contentious ones, punctuated with moments of triumph and joy and recovery. The Midbar is hard work. I want to suggest to you today that the reason the wilderness journey is so long and arduous is because it's a journey of understanding. And understanding, true understanding, rarely, if ever, comes to us instantaneously. Of course, many behave as if it does, and that's a source of much of the world's troubles, I think. We humans are too frequently an incurious race. We rush to judgment and make assumptions about people's motivations. We flatten complex issues into simplistic ones and complex human beings into caricatures. But if we're willing to look deeper, we can discover the intricacy of human behavior, the ways in which the triumphs and tragedies of this life are built on foundations that run deep but may not be entirely secure. I've been thinking about this, the lack of foundational security, with regard to the tragedy in Surfside, Florida. That tragedy of literal structural insecurity was entirely preventable, which is why I think many of us don't know quite how to react in this moment. Are we sad, disappointed, enraged? Do we blame the condo board, the builder, the inspector, the owners, some of whom didn't want to spend the money, or others who had trouble scraping it together? Do we blame the previous presidential administration for the trade war that drove up steel prices, or its pitiful response to the pandemic that led not only to so many deaths, but perhaps also to more pedestrian concerns like supply chain problems, which then are less pedestrian when it means maintaining basic safety becomes cost prohibitive? When local, state, or federal government doesn't step in, when lives are at risk, who do you blame? What's the relationship between blame and accountability? What happens when those who share responsibility are also among the victims? How are we meant to feel about that? And where do we locate our feelings of tribal identity within our broader concern for human life when Jewish people are part of the story? It took 40 years of wandering, according to the Midrash, and the death of an entire generation before sufficient healing and understanding were achieved to enter the Promised Land. It took 40 years for the Champlain Towers to fall. Will 140 lives lost be enough for enough of us to understand what must be done to avoid similar situations going forward? As we stand this week in our Torah cycle at the edge of the Midbar and gaze across the Jordan River, consider the incuriosity of humans and the fuzziness of boundaries. Chazak ve'amatz, Moses will say to Joshua, his successor, be strong and courageous. Strength, courage. These are also terms we associate with sport. Now, I've been a tennis fan my entire life. As a kid, I watched John McEnroe's antics, the colorful personalities of Andre Agassi or Michael Chang, the talent and grit of Martina Navratilova, Chris Evert, the Williams sisters. I remember Jimmy Connor's comeback. Remember that? My dad, he was like 10 years younger than I am now when that happened, by the way. My dad put me to bed with stories of Arthur Ashe, Billie Jean King, and the Battle of the Sexes. But I think the most courageous and sportsmanlike thing I've ever seen in tennis was when Naomi Osaka stood up for her mental well-being. Life is a journey, she writes. She made her journey better known to us when she courageously begged out of the French Open and then Wimbledon. She did so out of necessity, but also dignity. Imagine for a moment what it would take for a 4-time Grand Slam champion at the height of her career to take such a stand. Muhammad Ali was also scorned when he made his own statement of conscience. History has judged him well, and I think it will for her too. Osaka describes herself as in the tunnel, which she reminds her readers at the end of which there are people who can help and there is usually light. I do hope that people can relate and understand it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to talk about it. Osaka understands the distance between where the light creeps in and the end of the tunnel can be quite long. Miriam and I recently took a hike through the Blue Ridge Tunnel. Have you ever been to this place? It's really great. It's an old train tunnel through the Blue Ridge Mountains underneath Skyline Drive. There's water creeping along the edges. It's like 30 degrees cooler inside. And you walk and yet seem not to move closer to the speck of an opening in the distance where the light spills in. The Avodat Yisrael, the 18th century Maggid of Kuznets, observes that the rabbinic statement, happy are we that we get up and go to sleep morning and evening, is superfluous. It would have been sufficient simply to say we get up and go to sleep. But he says the Arizal, the Kabbalistic master Rabbi Isaac Luria, taught that the unification we bring about in the morning must incorporate the quality of the evening, and the quality of day is incorporated in night. What an insightful description of human existence, and also an apt metaphor for depression. Rabbi Josh Fagelson of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality suggests the creation narrative is formulated in binaries to shed light on the interrelationship between them. Day is not night, sky is not land, you are not me, he writes, and yet what we perceive as distinct entities are not really edges. When precisely does day begin and night end? Light creeps into the tunnel. In my case, writes Osaka, I felt under a great amount of pressure to disclose my symptoms, frankly, because the press and the tournament did not believe me. Her op-ed is a plea for athletes to be great competitors who also have some meaningful right to privacy. She longs for some boundaries to be less fuzzy, so that she and others can focus on what it takes to achieve not just athletic greatness, but greater wholeness, shlemut, which Fagelson suggests should be each person's goal. If the journey, the wilderness, is full of questions, a 40-year scavenger hunt, if you will, for some measure of clarity, the promised land is meant to signal an arrival of greater understanding, of wisdom. But once we understand more, once we take time to wrestle with the nuance of accountability in the face of tragedy like Surfside, or achieve some degree of empathy for the challenges of mental illness, we must determine what we do with that understanding. To what does our learning call us? Midrash Tanchuma teaches that inaction is no benign choice. Learning demands more of us. If a person of learning participates in public affairs, that person gives stability to the land, says the text. But if that person sits in their home and says to themselves, Ma li b'torah hatzibor, Ma li b'dinehem, Ma li lishmoa kolam, what have the problems of society to do with me? What do their trials and tribulations have to do with me? Why should I bother to listen to their voices? Let my soul dwell in peace. If one does this, teaches the Midrash, Harei ze machariv et haolam, they destroy the world. Shleimut, wholeness, cannot be won on the backs of others, nor by turning our backs to them. Nearly 150 lives were destroyed by collective inaction in Surfside. Their families will never be the same, nor will the lives of the survivors. Michael Phelps told Naomi Osaka that by speaking up, she may have saved a life. If that's true, she writes, then it was all worth it. The journey through the wilderness, my friends, is not linear, but often stochastic. Even as we move forward, it's more of a spiral. Light and darkness play off one another. We get up and go to sleep, morning and evening, and when we go to sleep, our tradition invites us to say the bedtime Shema, Kriyat Shema al Hamita. This prayer includes the words of Hashkivenu, which we also do in the evening service. Remove all adversaries from before us and from behind us, and shelter us in the shadow of your wings. Suffering in this world is real. You, of course, don't need me to tell you that. But we go forward on our journey. Ushmor tzeitenu voenu l'chaim u'lashalom me'ata v'ad olam. Guard our going out and our coming in for life and peace now and always. Life's journey is about departure and arrival, sometimes at the same time. As we go out, when we move forward, we must recognize our accountability to others. V'lo ye'anesh shum adam b'sibati, we say elsewhere in the bedtime Shema. May no one be punished on my account. Which is to say, may I learn the lessons of life's journey, knowing when to listen and learn, when to speak up and speak out, and when to insist that courage is about the simple recognition that our inaction in various ways may be doing more harm than we would like to admit. Shabbat Shalom and Chodesh Tov.